Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and this is my review of episode 4 of Starfleet Academy. And before I get into my many complaints and nitpicks, I want to mention the few positive things about this episode. First of all, it did not rip off as many ideas from other movies and shows as usual. You know how often in New Trek they kind of pay homage or inspired or whatever you want to call it, but they basically remake all kinds of little ideas from many different sources from other movies and kind of mix them all together, and it all feels very unoriginal. So this time they didn't do it as much. They did kind of copy paste things from previous Star Trek shows. There was one specific scene when Picard was making that speech quoting some famous judge from the Federation history, and here we have the doctor doing the exact same quote, but he messed it up. He said it incorrectly in a way that doesn't even make sense grammatically. And so at first it annoyed me of how unoriginal it is. Why cannot this show come up with its own good dialogue? Why does it have to copy paste the same lines from previous Star Trek shows? But at least they picked a good line, but then they butchered it. They did it incorrectly, because in the original Picard said, with the first link the chain is forged, the first speech censored, the first thought forbidden, the first freedom denied, chains us all irrevocably. And yet here the doctor messed it up. Here he says, the first thought forbidden, us all irrevocably. So what the hell does that even mean? And so how come no one noticed that the quote doesn't even make any sense? The second point I want to mention as an actual positive is they finally explained what the hell happened with the Klingons. Because I remember when I was watching Discovery, after they jumped into the future, they never showed a single Klingon. So at least here they kind of answered it. They explained that the Klingon planet Kronos, or Kronos is how they pronounced it suddenly in this show, their entire planet exploded, and probably many other of their planets, since they were a galactic empire and not only one planet. So I guess all their planets blew up, or most of them. So even though we never had an official explanation to what exactly happened with the Kling orcs that we saw in the first 2 seasons of Discovery, and how come all the Klingons now look like the proper Klingons, but we can kind of explain it away by saying there were different ethnic groups of the Klingons, and so not all of them look like that, and maybe all those orc Klingons, they all blew up on their planet, and that's why we'll never see them again. So that kind of neatly solves that little issue, and it explains how come we didn't see any Klingons in that Senate meeting in Discovery, since apparently there are very few of them left, and they're basically refugees. Now, what I don't like about it is that it feels repetitive with the plot of season 1 of Picard, which was about the Romulan supernova. Also because the Romulans lost their planet, somehow their entire empire collapsed, and all the Romulans became refugees. And so it starts feeling really repetitive in New Trek, just as they constantly say how space walls are bad, that the different planets try to isolate themselves with space walls, and walls are bad. And so the Federation also should open its borders and let anyone who wants to in. All the refugees of the galaxy need to go into the Federation, and we need to give them our planets to colonize. And because the Klingons refuse to accept charity, they only are willing to take planets if they conquer them. So the Federation or Starfleet kind of staged the fake battle to pretend as if the Klingons took that planet by force with conquest, and that way their owner is satisfied and then they'll agree to settle there. So I guess it was kind of nice on the side of the Federation, but it also makes no sense. Like, why cater to the Klingons so much if they are so unwilling to compromise? They're so stubborn and so militaristic, they cannot give up their traditions of only taking things by force. And so if they're like that, then they're the ones to blame then. And so why should we twist ourselves to help them when they refuse to get help? Also, it encourages their violent behavior. Like, you make them think as if they won by force, and so that will just encourage them to keep doing that in the future. After they rebuild, they might become another empire and again try to take more planets by force. And so why not force them to sign some kind of condition of a non-aggression pact with the Federation, something like that, and then give them the planet. And if they refuse, then let them refuse. Let them die, as Kirk said. It's like giving them a Darwin Award. If someone does something so stupid that he kills himself because of it, maybe it's a good thing, because he removes his stupid genes from existence. And so the same with the species. If they are so stupid and so stubborn and so violent that they're unable to solve anything peacefully, then it's their own fault. And so whatever consequence of that should only be blamed on them. Also, why would they die? They say they settled on all kinds of planets, so why do they need the exact planet that is like their original planet to be able to live? I mean, we constantly see Klingons on many different planets and then live normally. So why should they have exactly the same planet as they had before to survive? Like, couldn't they survive anywhere else? Like, it doesn't really make any sense. Unless it's a way to get all the Klingons into one place so that there will be less of a problem to others. Maybe they wanted them all to go to one planet instead of being all over the place. And so isn't that kind of racist to say, oh, we don't want the Klingons to be roaming all over the galaxy, so we want to settle them on one place so that they'll be only there. And so that seems even more racist. Also, somewhere in the episode, there was some cadet who said some conspiracy theory that maybe the Klingons blew up their own planet, which kind of makes no sense, just like, the Romulans blew up their own evacuation fleet in Picard. Like, why would they do that when it damages their own people? And yet they did, and so that's one of the many things that didn't make any sense in season 1 of Picard. And so here one cadet says the Klingons blew up their own planet, and then someone else says that's a conspiracy theory. But now that I think about it, do you remember how season 1 of Discovery ended? How Michael Burnham actually ended the war? She planted a bomb in the middle of Kronos that if it detonates, it will cause a chain reaction that will destroy their entire planet. They gave the remote control of that to that Klingon L'Oreal, who then forced the other Klingons to obey her, otherwise she'll blow up the planet, and then she became Chancellor of the Klingons, and yet it was never explained what exactly happened with all of that later. So was the bomb still inside the planet's core? I guess no one else can reach it except Discovery, and Discovery was gone from that timeline. So was the bomb still there in the middle of the planet? Maybe that's what actually blew up during the burn, and that's why their entire planet blew up. And why are the Klingons going extinct? Like, didn't they have a huge empire with hundreds of planets? Like, they were a big threat to the Federation. So shouldn't they also have had at least a few dozen planets? So did all the planets blow up? It doesn't really make sense. In this episode, they talk as if there are only a few hundred Klingons left. So how come? Unless maybe Section 31 put something in the Klingon blood wine that turned all the Klingons gay. And that's why they're going extinct, because they can no longer reproduce properly. And even though it hasn't yet been confirmed that Gayen is indeed gay, but there was one scene of him meeting up with Bluey which seemed almost erotic. Like, they were hugging each other and caressing each other, and it looked like they were about to kiss, and then in the last second they didn't. And it's funny how Bluey is always in his human form, even though we know he's some kind of blue alien. So can he also look like other aliens or what? Like, they never properly explain that. And it's funny, in his human form he has these 3 dots on his neck, these moles or whatever, and they look kind of like the rank pips from TNG. So that's always funny to me to notice. Like, he should be a commander because he already has the 3 pips on his neck. But since his true form is a blue alien, so does that mean he's deliberately choosing to have those marks or what? So they never explain anything properly. So anyway, we finally see some of Gayen's backstory, and he comes from a triad family. He actually had 2 fathers and 1 mother, and they keep mentioning that in the episode, but they only really focus on 1 father. So is that the biological father, the real father? And the other guy is just there and never has any lines. And so it was totally irrelevant to the plot. And if it was some other alien that we never heard about their family structure, maybe it would make sense. But every time we saw the Klingons in the past, they always had 1 father, 1 mother. We saw Worf's wedding in Deep Space Nine, and the whole ceremony, the whole legend about Kahless and his wife, and 2 hearts beating together, all of it. So it's obviously the norm in the Klingon society to have 1 mother and 1 father, 2 parents. And yet here they say he comes from some kind of triangle family, and they talk about it as if it's totally normal. So it's once again part of their agenda of trying to normalize these sort of things. And if it was some other aliens, then I'd say nothing bad at all, because we have no idea how it's like on other planets. Maybe their whole biology is different, and they do indeed need to have 3 parents. Like, we have the 1 episode like that in Enterprise, which showed some aliens who had to have 3 genders to reproduce or whatever. And so if it was something like that, I'd be totally fine with it. But the Klingons we always saw had the same kind of family structure like humans. It's obviously they're trying to normalize these sort of things. And so what will come next? Will they next be normalizing sex with animals or pedophilia? Even though I think in Voyager they did something like that, because Neelix was dating someone who was 2 years old, even though she was biologically mature, but that was still kind of creepy. And technically, all these aliens mating with each other, that's almost like bestiality because it's a different species. And so if you're mating with a different species from your own, isn't that sort of like bestiality? It's also strange how in the show all aliens are shown to be exactly the same as humans, only coming from different cultures. And so any differences are only cultural and not biological. But that's not how it was in TNG. There were some episodes that showed clearly that the violent temper of the Klingons comes from their biology. Even Alexander, who was raised by a half Klingon mother who did not believe in the Klingon culture, and he was basically raised as a human, and yet was still really violent and angry because that's some biological property. And the same with Worf himself. He was raised by humans, and yet he had all these violent urges. And Alexandra's mother also said she does not believe in all the Klingon traditions, and yet something from inside of her is causing her to have violent outbursts and all of it. And so they obviously show that it's some kind of biological property of the Klingons. I guess we could combat it by, giving them a hypo spray with something to calm them down, and then they can behave like humans without having to restrain themselves all the time. But in this show, we see Gayen, he never has any violent outbursts. He seems to be totally gentle by heart, and his culture and traditions and his family try to force him to be like them, to be a warrior, and he didn't want to be. And it's kind of a very similar story to what they were trying to do with Alexander in the later seasons of TNG, when he didn't want to be a warrior. And then they never really continued that, so that was kind of a missed opportunity. So I'm not against the basic idea of what they're trying to do here. I just think the execution of it is horrible. They don't really do it properly. And that's too bad. That also really annoys me because the potential is there to do something good with it. And, every Star Trek show of the past had some character who was kind of like an outsider, either exiled by his people or stuck between two different cultures and having to choose between them, or then serving as a bridge between them. So all of that kind of stuff can be very interesting and dramatic, and it can tie to some bigger plot of the galaxy of, uniting two opposing powers to be allies, using such a person who was between them. So we have the potential of a lot of good stories with that kind of idea, and yet the way they do it here is really unsatisfactory, in my opinion. And as I said in previous reviews, I was waiting for this kind of episode to really judge this character of Gayen. I didn't want to say anything bad before I see more of him, but unfortunately I'm really disappointed, not just by the writing, but even the acting. In the previous episodes, he only had like short scenes, he had one-liners, very short sentences, and so his way of speaking kind of fit that. So he talks like this, every word is separated from the other, kind of like Shatner's Kirk sometimes, but Gayen talks like that all the time. And so once he had more dialogue in this episode, he had very long pieces of dialogue, and yet he was still talking in that way. And it got really annoying because it simply takes longer. Like, why do you separate each word from each other? Why do you not say in one straight sentence what you want to say? So each word is separated. So it got really annoying the way he speaks. And maybe we can excuse the way, maybe by saying he actually learned English recently. So he struggles with it, but why not simply use a universal translator then? By the way, that can also be a way to excuse away all the dirty language of many of the characters, since half of them are not even human, they're aliens, so maybe they're actually talking in their own languages and we only hear it through the universal translator, which maybe translates to our modern talk today. So maybe that's why we keep hearing assholes and shit and fuck and chicken shit and words like that all the time in the show. Maybe it's not the way they actually talk, that's simply how the universal translator is translating so that we can understand them. But this is obviously just an excuse for the way they talk in a horrible modern tongue of today. It was also annoying how they kept mispronouncing things from the Klingon language in this episode. Like they keep saying, instead of Kronos, they say Kronos. Instead of Kailash, they said Kailash. But maybe different groups of Klingons have different ways to pronounce these words, just like different accents on Earth. But then even the Starfleet people start saying things incorrectly, like the Kitoma records, which were mentioned so many times in all the Star Trek shows, and yet here they say them in a different way. They say Kitomer Accords or something like that. Sounds totally different, and these are Starfleet people, presumably talking in English, so why are they now suddenly mispronouncing things? And so obviously the writers and the directors and the editors and all the people involved simply did not bother to check how these things were pronounced previously. And so that's really annoying, considering each episode is like $10 million. Where exactly does all the money go? Also, all the flashback scenes with the Klingons were just filmed in some forest which looks like Earth. Nothing alien at all about it, and there were very few special effects. At the beginning of the episode we see some nebula out in space, and so the Starfleet Academy ship is once again in space, and no real reason was given for why exactly are they out there. And the counselor of the academy is totally amazed by the nebula. She looks out and gives a whole speech about how beautiful it is and how amazing it is, but isn't she 400 years old and was out in space even before the burn, and so shouldn't she have seen stuff like that many times in her lifetime? So why is she so amazed by that? And we also see that nebula has lightning storms inside of it. That's also something that is really annoying. In New Trek they constantly show that all the nebulas are like clouds, that the ship flies among the clouds and we see and hear lightning storms in it. And also we see her from the window on the bridge, and it makes the whole ship look much smaller. This ship is supposed to contain all of Starfleet Academy that we see in all the other scenes, which has huge empty spaces and all of it, and so if her window is so small comparison to the rest of the ship, where exactly does all the other stuff fit in there? Unless they have that space shrinking technology that I mentioned in Discovery when I was trying to come up with excuses for this sort of thing, but the show itself never tries to, so it simply doesn't make any sense. Also, whenever we see the cadets, it feels as if we're just watching students in high school. Like we see a bunch of cadets walking around with what looks like musical instruments, and they constantly are having fun and play games and stuff like that, so why does it feel like high school and not an academy that is supposed to be training officers to be in Starfleet? So it should be more like a military, and yet it feels like a high school. And another example of this is during one of the debates that they were doing, they were shown a topic that they have to either defend or argue against. And one of those arguments was that Starfleet Academy should not require homework. Oh, the poor cadets, they don't want to do any homework, so this is ridiculous. This is, again, it feels like a high school show. And the doctor is teaching them how to debate. And then we have a bunch of scenes of them debating each other in kind of speed debating. And the way they do it is by kind of quoting all kinds of legal documents from the past. And so it feels like, courtroom drama. And so why is any legal document in the Federation apply to some alien civilization at all? And so nothing about it makes any sense. I'm not even trying to analyze the dialogue because it's all nonsensical. It's just quoting, that Vulcan versus that Ferengi, and that trial case versus that trial case, and that's supposed to prove something in the debate. And also, how does the doctor even determine who won or lost the debate? Like we see them debating each other in kind of speed debating, and then he chooses the winner by pressing some button. But what makes him the judge? Like, how can he choose whoever won the debate? How can you win a debate of opposing viewpoints? If it's all controversial topics, then how can you determine who won or not? And also, Marco is the best master debater, according to what he himself said. And I think that's a joke they lifted from South Park, that there was an episode when Cartman was master debating people online, and his mom wanted to come into the room, and he shouted to her, "Don't come in, mom, I'm master debating here, don't come in." So that's the same kind of joke here, of Marco saying he's a master debater. And it also starts becoming annoyingly obvious that Marco is basically a Gary Stu. That's the male equivalent of the Mary Sue problem. Just like Michael Burnham in Discovery, who was the best at everything. She was a genius at every single field. She was a know-it-all. She was also physically superior. She could win any fight against anyone. And she was the bravest and the smartest and the most compassionate. And so the rest of the crew were just watching her and being in awe of her and not contributing anything because she did everything by herself. So Marco in the show is kind of like that. He's a bodybuilder and he's also a genius. He could hack any computer system. In this episode we see him hacking Alpha 5 to bring him some food because he was too lazy to go to the replicator. And he's also the best master debater, and he somehow remembers all these legal documents from the entire Federation history, even though he was never in school in the Federation, he was just a criminal. So I could accept him being kind of clever with the street smarts, knowing how to survive in the galaxy, stuff like that is fine, I guess, but somehow he also knows all the history of the Federation and all the legal documents, like when did he even have time to read all that stuff? And back to the character of Gayen, they really make him more and more pathetic with each episode. Like at first I was giving it the benefit of the doubt, I was waiting to see what they'll do, but unfortunately it just gets worse and worse. So now they show that he's unable to even speak in front of an audience. He's very shy, so whenever he has to speak in front of people, he starts getting a panic attack. And the doctor, who is a doctor, doesn't even realize what's happening. Why not give him some kind of a hypo spray to calm him down or something? No, he just doesn't understand what's happening. And so he's unable to debate because he gets too nervous. And then Bluey has to calm him down by giving him a few hugs and teaching him how to breathe or something, and that helps him. And then in the end of the episode, suddenly he is able to talk in front of people. So, on a personal level, I would love such a character and such a journey of improvement, because I myself used to be very shy in the past. I also was afraid to talk in front of an audience. So I could easily relate to that, but the way they make this character kind of pathetic at everything, like what is he actually good at? Since they show him being incapable of using any violence, any force, so he refuses to even participate in sports. He refuses to stand up to a bully who bullied him in the beginning, the same guy, Bluey, who suddenly turned good later. In the first episode, he was a bully. Then he became Bluey and became good somehow. And now he almost becomes his lover. And he's not even a nice guy, since in this episode, Marco tries to help him out all the time, and he only gets angry at that and insults him and so on. So he's an a-hole as well. So what's so good about him? So this character starts to really annoy me. And his whole backstory and all those flashback scenes of his traumatic past of a few months ago, when he was useless as a Klingon, he refused to go on hunts, he didn't want to kill any animals, he didn't want to become a warrior. Then he found some kind of probe by Starfleet that is recruiting people to Starfleet. Since they're so desperate, they send these little balls everywhere in the galaxy, I guess. And because his brother died, because he got stabbed by someone, and they say something about his blood being black, and for a moment I thought maybe they'll finally try to explain why Klingon blood looks different at different circumstances. Remember how in Star Trek 6 it was always pink, but in most of the franchise they had the red blood. And so here they said something about, oh, your blood is black. And so for a moment I thought maybe they'll finally try to explain away that continuity question, but they didn't. They just said that the blade was poisoned and that's why my blood is black. And Gayen watches him die and wishes he had the Starfleet medical skills and technology to be able to save him. And I guess that's why he wants to become a doctor now. So that's a really similar story to something that Bashir once told in Deep Space Nine, that when he was a kid, he watched some girl die, and there was some kind of herb nearby that could have cured her if he knew about it, and that's why he went into medicine, to be able to save people, so it's kind of similar. And his brother was also the only one who saw him, the only one who respected his wishes of not being a warrior and all of that. And that's also something that is common in New Trek, that all kinds of characters want to be seen all the time. We had that with Tilly in Discovery, and so many characters in New Trek have this desire of people accepting them as they are, and it's always this phrase of being seen. Another small nitpick is that we had a good look at Gayen's teeth this episode when he was talking so much, and he has perfectly normal human teeth, but all the Klingons in the older shows always had those scary looking teeth, and so it's kind of established, and yet here suddenly they forgot all about it, and then the father basically abandons him on that planet and lives with the rest of the family on that spaceship they had, and left Gayen all by himself on that planet, and that the recruiting device got broken. Later in the episode we see that he still has the pieces of it, and then Marco is the one who fixes it for him. So wait, if he never fixed it, then how exactly was he able to contact Starfleet to be recruited if that device was broken? So that also was never explained. Also in that scene when Marco hacks Alpha 5 to deliver them food, he says, this food is really good, it doesn't even taste like replicated food. So once again, with these innuendos that replicated food is not as tasty as real food, which is something I dislike in Utrecht, especially since it's now even farther away in the future. So shouldn't replicators be better? Shouldn't you be not able to detect any difference with real food? But no, they all hate replicated food for some reason. And then they eat pizza with pepperoni, and Gayen refuses to eat any meat. So he removes it, and I thought, oh no, they're now making him vegan as well. But then he says he refuses to eat any food that wasn't killed in a fair fight, something like that. So I guess we always heard about, Klingons hunting their targs and stuff like that, but do they truly hunt and give a fair fighting chance to any creature they eat? What about Gag, those worms they eat? Do they fight with them first? Like they give the Gag a chance to fight with them, and only if it loses they eat it? Like, it makes no sense. Like, what do you mean I cannot eat any food that wasn't given a proper fight? Like, what about Gag? And also it's replicated food, so it's not even real meat, it doesn't come from a real animal, so what do you mean I cannot eat it? So he's a vegan now? And then in the end of the episode, he does eat that stew made from Gag or whatever that he was given. So suddenly his own rules no longer apply. So this is what I mean with self-contradictory, illogical things in these shows. That just doesn't make any sense, and that drives me nuts. Also, in the end of the episode, the Femme Hadar comes to talk with Gayen, and he tells her about that story of how his dad abandoned him after he refused to shoot that bird of prey. And then his father tried to shoot it and missed, and then the Femme Hadar somehow magically knows what really happened. And she tells him, actually, he missed on purpose because he wanted to let you go and find your own path. And so he didn't miss by accident, it was on purpose to free you from the hunt or whatever, and then he believes her and gets relieved. But when we go back and look at the actual scene, it doesn't make sense, because after he missed and wasn't able to kill that bird, he got angry and tried to smash that recruiting device from Starfleet, and then he pushed Gayen and they were almost fighting. And so what do you mean he tried to free him and it was a deliberate miss, when right after that he tried to smash that recruiting ball, which he didn't, and then it just rolled away and then it fell somewhere and then it smashed by itself, it fell into pieces by itself. So that seems kind of a weak technology for the 32nd century. And then Gayen was unable to fix it since he still had the broken parts later. So how exactly was he recruited even? So he was left alone on that planet, his family abandoned him, but the Femme Hadar somehow knows what really happened. That his father actually did honor him and did let him go on purpose, but it didn't look like that if you actually watch the scene. How would she know what really happened? And he somehow believes her. And then we see him crying actual tears. And that also annoyed me, because we have a specific quote by Spock in Star Trek 6 saying that Klingons are incapable of crying, they have no tear ducts. And also in season 3 of Picard, Worf said that he never wept in his life, which sounded as if he's incapable of it. But to be fair, we did have some scenes in Deep Space Nine, I think, when Worf's brother was apparently crying. We did see some moisture in his eye. And there was also a scene in TNG when Worf was telling someone about the legend of Kahless and how he wept and his tears filled the ocean. So obviously there were contradictions with that in the past as well. And also that scene with Spock was only in the director's cut of the movie and not the theatrical cut. So we can argue maybe that's not canonical. So maybe Klingons can cry, or maybe it depends on the type of Klingon, since they are apparently not one ethnic group. We also have a Klingon in this episode who looks more human than others. He's apparently a former lover of Captain Four Eyes, who she tries to offer that planet to, and he refuses, saying that we can only accept it by conquest. So anyway, in the end of the episode, Gayen suddenly has the confidence to talk in front of an audience, and he convinces them that they should respect the Klingon traditions, even though he himself never respected them and didn't want to be a part of them, and yet he convinces the rest of Starfleet that they have to respect the other Klingons' customs and traditions. And so then Captain Four Eyes, I guess, got the idea to fake the whole battle in the end. So they basically provoke the Klingons so that they'll fight over that planet and then pretend to lose the fight, so that the Klingons can claim victory and get that planet that they wanted to give them anyway, which they refuse to get as charity. But if they win, they can get it as spoils of war, and that will fit their tradition. So they're kind of almost winking at each other during the battle and kind of deliberately missing. and there's no casualties, and then the Federation surrenders and gives that planet over to the Klingons, and that's how they solve their refugee problem. Since now the Klingons will have a planet identical to their old planet, which the Federation had, which no one else inhabited for some reason. Maybe in the short term it will buy you peace and quiet, but in the long term it simply will encourage the violent behavior. If they think they won, and they start to believe their own lies, and that will be part of their legends, their history, then it will promote such behavior in the future. So maybe later, maybe for now the Klingons are weak and not a real threat to anyone, but in a few generations they might rebuild their empire again, and in their legends it will be told that they defeated the mighty Federation and conquered this planet from them. So that will simply encourage more negative behavior like that in the future. So was it really the good idea to solve it like that? Wouldn't it be better to force them to sign some kind of non-aggression pact with the Federation at least? So just giving them this planet as a gift and pretending as if you lost it to them, that they are so powerful, they will think that their aggression paid off, and so in the future they might continue to behave like that. And so I think it's not a good idea in the long term. Also, what message does it send to the rest of the galaxy? Wouldn't it show the Federation to be weak? Maybe other powers will want to take their planets by conquest. Since it worked for the Klingons, then others will also want to do the same. And so what message will it send? Will just invite more violence in the future, so it's ridiculous. So I do not think that's how it should have been done. And also, why are the Klingons in danger of extinction if you don't give them this planet? We saw them being able to survive in any condition that humans can, so they can obviously live on any planet where other humanoids live. So why should they have exactly the same kind of planet as the old one? Why? And this planet is now inside Federation territory, so what will that mean? So at the very least, you should have forced them to sign some kind of non-aggression pact and a treaty and so on. And if they don't want to sign it, then don't help them. Why would they go extinct? They wouldn't. So what was even the point of all of it, except pushing the message that you shouldn't try to change the culture of your enemy, the aggressor, and you should accept them as refugees into your own territory, even though they think they are here to conquer you, and you should just forgive them? And so what message does that send? What the hell is the purpose of the message in this episode? That the aggressors should be rewarded because that's their culture, so you should bow down to them? Look, it makes no sense. It's also funny to me how the Academy is always in the center of these huge political galactic events. Like, how is the Academy cadets allowed to influence such big events at all? Just like previously, how they convinced the Betazoid president to rejoin the Federation because he heard some cadets talking about it. Like, why do cadets influence galactic events and not the actual politicians of the galaxy? That is also kind of ridiculous. We also see one of the cadets is from a Morn's species, and yet once again is totally bald. And that's something I mentioned in my reviews of Discovery when we started seeing that species all over the place, and they all looked exactly like Morn. And yet in Deep Space Nine, we had a specific scene of saying that Morn used to have luscious hair and only lost all of it because he kept a bunch of latinum hidden in one of his stomachs. And yet all the members of his species which we ever saw in Discovery and now in this show all look exactly like him and without any hair. So technically it's a continuity mistake, even though we can explain it away by saying maybe Quark was only joking when he said that. But wouldn't it be funny if we actually saw that cadet talking in one of those debates and not being able to shut up, and they have to tell him that he talks too much? You know, that would tie with that joke that was always in DS9, that Morn would never shut up, even though we never saw him talking on screen because that mask actually made it impossible, the mouth wouldn't move. Also, it was strange when the Admiral was talking with Captain Four Eyes, and she asked him, how do you know about my relationship with that Klingon leader? And he said, it's because I've been reading your personal files. But aren't personal files meant to be, personal? So unless she gave him permission, which they never said that, so that also sounded kind of creepy. And it's also funny how the Klingon transport ships look very similar to the Cardassian transport ships that we saw in Deep Space Nine. So once again, they're kind of ripping off older Trek and seemingly incapable of coming up with their own ship designs, and the designs they do come up with look kind of horrible. And even the main ship of the Academy, as I said, makes no sense, that it looks too small from the outside and too big on the inside. And also in this episode we see the main section in the middle separating from the outside section, which I thought was the nacelles. and then jumping to warp. So the middle section has its own warp drive, and it jumps to warp without the rest of the stuff. And so when they land on Earth, that means they have a working warp drive on the same part of the ship. So knowing that something like the burn can happen, why the hell would Earth allow any ship with a warp engine to land on the surface? Isn't that kind of dangerous? If another burn happens, that might destroy all life on Earth, just like what happened with the Klingons. And so why would they ever allow it? That also makes no sense now, since it's now established that the middle section is the one with the warp drive. So what are those outer parts of the ship even for? And we also have a member berry of the USS Riker, which seems to have detached nacelles. Maybe it allows the ship to get into weird positions and dock with other ships from the back in a weird way. Since it's named after Riker, so you get the joke. So in the end, the Klingons settled on that planet, and Gayen's family is stated to still be alive, since he thought they got killed somewhere in the episode that one of their ships crashed on some planet. And by the way, when they showed clips of all the disasters, it's always reused clips from the previous shows. So the same clips of planets blowing up that we saw in Discovery and Strange New Worlds, it's always the exact same clips. I think even in Picard, when they showed that vision that AI will destroy all life, we always see the exact same clips, and it starts getting repetitive. So if it's such an expensive show, and they have so much extra cash for special effects and all these robots flying around and everything, why can't they make simple space shots better? Also, when they showed us Badger in the first episode, it was also a reused shot from a planet we saw in Strange New Worlds, and every time we see these explosions on planets and cities being blown up, it's always the same exact footage over and over again. Since when do Klingon buildings look exactly like human buildings from Earth? So little things like that maybe are insignificant, but they all pile together to make me feel like it's a cheap show, even though it's supposed to be expensive. All the parts with the Klingons on the planet is just shot in the forest, which I guess they added some strange colors to it, but still it's obviously just an Earth forest, nothing alien about it. And this whole show so far didn't really introduce us of even a single new science fiction idea, except being set in space and having some aliens, but there was not yet even one single original new science fiction idea of any kind. Everything we see was done before and done much better. And even when they quote an entire dialogue from a previous show, they even messed that up by being incapable of reading the line as it was and messing it up to make no sense. And so I think this was actually the worst episode of the show so far, even though it didn't steal as many things from other movies, and at least it tried to do some Star Trek-ish stories, but it still fell flat. It was all really boring, not well done, not well written, not well acted, and so I think it was the worst episode of the show so far. So that's all I have to say for now. Let me know what you think, and we can discuss it all in the comments below, and I'll see you all next time. Bye bye.